Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all of you who are with us today. This is an excellent day for IRMA. I hope that you are all having an excellent day. And for us, this week is a very important moment with the publication of our third report of independent audit of the Salar de Atacama lithium operation in Chile. Before beginning this webinar, we would like to let all of those present that we have a simultaneous interpretation from English to Spanish. You will be able to find at the bottom of the screen, there's a button that says interpretation, and you can change between Spanish and English. Any questions? If you would like to ask questions, please do not hesitate to do so. We will answer all your questions at the end of the webinar. The questions can be made in Spanish or in English. These will be anonymous, so please feel free to send the questions you wish. I will now give the floor to our Executive Director, Amy Boulanger.
Thank you so much, Adan. And I will welcome you all now in English and also say in English that for those of you who have joined, you may choose interpretation at the bottom of your screen. If you go to a little globe icon, you can choose which language you'd like to hear and choose English or Spanish. And we welcome you here today, and you may ask your questions in either English or Spanish as we go. We are so grateful to have many of you joining us live, and then also we will be recording this, so any of you who are not able to participate today or want to share with your colleagues who couldn't join us can share afterwards, and this webinar will be on the IRMA website. Of course, we are here today with the event of the release of an audit report, the first since COVID slowed the process of having auditors visit on site to mines being measured against the IRMA standard. It's an exciting moment, but this is the first of several audit reports coming out over the next several weeks. So we will be sharing a bit about the Albemarle audit process and the report that's just come out, but also sharing the context of a number of other audits that are coming out as well. So we would like to share with you a bit of background for those of you who are new to IRMA. We're going to take a few minutes at the beginning just to put the context for why IRMA is here, and how these reports happen, how audits happen, and the accountability to diverse stakeholders and Indigenous rights holders, workers, and a diverse set of people around the world who are concerned with the impacts of mining today and how to drive value for improved practices. So we are in a world right now with increasing attention on the mining sector. The raw materials that are used in industrialized society every day that go into buildings, into automobiles, into technology, and into jewelry and others have increasing attention on them, in large part because of their association as well with energy transition. Materials for solar, wind, many different kinds of batteries, including the batteries that go into electric vehicles. At the same time that, given the impacts, the tremendous difficulty it is to extract those materials, we are living in a world that is already living with climate stress, increasing floods, increasing drought, risks to drinking water, risks to Indigenous cultures pressed to the edge, and a deep fear and distrust of greenwashing, and broken trust between many mining affected communities in the industry. But in this moment, that greater attention is coming to the raw materials that we all use each day and we are all complicit in, and that we rely on an industry to provide for us. We have end brands who are increasingly seeking to be active in more responsible sourcing, reaching up supply chains that many didn't even understand and know, because it may be 5, 7, 10 points removed between the raw material point and the end brand. Now we are increasingly understanding supply chains better, and we have investors and end brand customers who are being active in their own work to meet their own company commitments for protecting a range of environmental and social values, and also being responsive to increased legal expectations to understand those supply chains and do their due diligence to reduce harm. A voluntary initiative like IRMA will never replace the critical role of law in government and the rules that all operators should follow, but we hope to be a support and a template and create market value for stronger laws and oversight. So what IRMA is to do that, IRMA is now the world's most rigorous and detailed standard describing best practices for environmental and social responsibility, stronger than any country's laws, but it's not pass-fail. Mines can come in at any level of performance, demonstrate where they are now, use it as a bit of a benchmark, and show improvement over time and gain value and recognition for doing that. It applies anywhere in the world for all types of mined materials. The assessment is not just declaring a company more responsible, but really looking site to site where the impacts to workers and communities happen. But it encourages mining companies to make a commitment to bring all of their sites in and do that work at each site. And it is the only standard for large-scale mining which is equally governed by affected communities and NGOs and labor unions working across the table, from private sector leaders, including mining companies, their customers in the purchasing sector, and also the finance sector. It is intentionally broad. There are more than 20 chapters in the IRMA standard. The idea is to not have it be worker health and safety or clean drinking water. It's not Indigenous rights or clean air, but really bringing under one roof the range of issues, knowing there will be challenges in some and strengths in other, but we don't want to tell only part of the story. We want to bring the essential nature of each of these issues together and give a company an opportunity to really speak comprehensively to its commitments towards more responsible practices. Foundational in that is equal governance. IRMA is equally governed by 6 houses who hold accountability to what the standard is and the rules of how it's measured at sites. There are 6 stakeholder houses that are listed here, each with 2 seats. They are equally governing, not only because they each have 2 seats, but also because a house cannot be left behind in decisions. If there are 2 no votes from any house, that is a block on decision-making. And so 10 of 12 votes don't carry a decision if you would be leaving a house behind. It's really about creating value and trying to rebuild that trust and accountability amongst all those sectors. This is a sense of the range and diversity of those purchasers who are buying mined material, who are customers to the mining sector, who have come in as IRMA members and are asking their suppliers to participate and do IRMA audits, provide that transparency on impacts, and then also show improvement over time. But it's not just the private sector. Again, you have active engagement of NGOs and affected communities, labor unions as well, who are also holding that accountability and creating expectations and value for improvement and change at mine sites. This includes a number of organizations who would prefer not to have just voluntary initiatives, who are concerned that voluntary initiatives may reduce the role of law and government, and that we need to push the essential role of law and government to set the rules that all operators should follow. But in the absence of that, and given how many different countries have laws weaker than others, using an international high bar standard like IRMA can help create a template and a support to government, a permission slip greater in the market for greater environmental and social responsibility, but one which we ourselves need to hold accountable, that it's not being used for greenwashing. It is not used to say that existing status quo practice is enough, but rather that we really try to push for this moment where human rights, Indigenous rights, clean drinking water are rights that are happening at all mining company operations around the world. To that end, you see increasingly governments referencing to the IRMA standard, whether that be the Biden administration, White House looking at supply chains, the EU Parliament looking at materials that flow into batteries, or in the climate talks in Paris. We seek to be a resource to improving law and government, and a resource to Indigenous leaders and Indigenous communities asserting their free, prior, and informed consent and cultural heritage rights where extraction happens. and supporting mining companies who are looking to engage directly with Indigenous communities and protecting FPIC. So with this, I'm going to turn to Michelle, who can speak more directly to audits. How do they work and how are they held accountable, and to introduce you also to the most recent audit report release.
Thanks, Amy. You can go to the next slide. So there's a number of stages in the IRMA audit process, and it starts with a self-assessment. Self-assessment is a process where the sites can use the standard with an online tool and go through and rate their own performance, document their rationale for that, upload evidence, and really build an understanding of how they view their performance against what the IRMA standard lays out in terms of requirements. The self-assessment process is required for the independent audit, but it precedes the engagement of an independent audit firm. And sites can spend a few months or a few years doing the self-assessment. It's done anonymously. It's not monitored. It is simply a process that allows sites to understand where they are at when measured against a responsible mining standard, and perhaps take time to spend to invest efforts into improving their operations. Once a site has completed a self-assessment and they have elected to move into independent audit, which allows them, in engaging in that process, allows them at the end of the process to make claims about their performance to the world. The mines will engage with an approved third-party audit firm and begin the audit process. Thank you. So the audits are publicly noticed. So when audits start, there's an announcement that the audit starts. That happens on our website. Oftentimes, the mine sites will also share that information as well. And it is letting everybody know that the audit is beginning. Oftentimes, there can be outreach to interested parties in this process to let them know that that's happening. IRMA audits are really meant to be very transparent and inclusive. And so we do public notice of that to let everybody know that the audit is starting. We also do another public notice prior to the on-site engagement, as that's a very valuable time to engage with local communities by the audit firms in a way that does not include the mine site personnel. Is an opportunity for government officials, for NGOs, for community members, for workers to participate in the audit process. The other way we're transparent is we published a report that is a detailed report that reviews the site's performance against every single requirement. And you will see the rating that has been assigned by the auditor. You will see the rationale that the auditors provide. All the scores are provided on our report. And that is really intended to enhance the engagement that is already built into the IRMA process to engage communities and create conversation. So now, just a little look at who's participating right now. We have currently 69 mining companies that are in the process of participating in that self-assessment process. And as you can see, they're well represented throughout the world. There are many minerals that are part of it. The IRMA standard is intended to be a global standard intended for all minerals. And I think most important really is intended for all mines to participate at whatever point they are at in their journey in terms of responsible mining. We currently have 60 sites that are self-assessing against the standard, and 13 that are actively participating in the independent audit process. Looking at those that are currently working through the independent audit process, you can see we have several sites that have been actively engaging in auditing and improving their performance with reports underway. And following this release that we have this week of the Albemarle report, we're also anticipating that the SQM report for their Chilean operations, as well as 2 sites in Brazil, 4 sites in South Africa for Anglo-American, and then the Livent Phoenix mine in Argentina will all be coming out in 2023. We also have 2 sites that were the original 2 sites that were audited, the Carrizal site in Mexico and the Anglo-American site in Zimbabwe have both undergone surveillance audits. And so surveillance audit reports will be coming out for those sites. And then finally, we have 2 sites that have just recently started their independent audit process. IRMA has a mine in Senegal, and Syrah Resources has a site in Mozambique, which are beginning their audit processes and have, I believe, are in the stage 1 process, which we'll talk about in a second. So we'll look at the Albemarle audit process timeline, and I'll explain a little bit about these stages as we go through. So Albemarle completed their self-assessment in mid-2021. They engaged their audit firm, CVS, and CVS initiated the stage 1 desktop audit at the end of 2021. And this stage 1 desktop audit is a careful and thorough review of the self-assessment tool that has been put together by the site, and also oftentimes includes interviews with site personnel and may even involve some early engagement with community or stakeholders. And it's really intended to understand from a baseline perspective, what's the performance of the mine, and what can they expect to see when they go on site, and how to plan the on-site audit. The on-site audit was then conducted in April of 2022, and following this audit, Albemarle elected to use early corrective action period, which IRMA allows, and it allows sites to address shortcomings, perhaps address issues where with just a small amount of effort they could improve their score, and it really allows them to learn from the audit process and move forward in their journey. As a result of that early corrective action, the auditors returned to do a follow-up assessment in October of 22 to verify that the changes that Albemarle implemented had resulted in, demonstrated improvement of performance. The on-site audits for Albemarle, for IRMA, are pretty unusual in the world of auditing. They really do spend, there's a big investment during the audit in interviewing both mine management, but also workers at the site. Workers are interviewed without the presence of management in private. So there'll be one-on-one interviews. Sometimes there's small group interviews. Auditors reach out to community members and invite them to participate in, again, either one-on-one meetings or group meetings if they'd like. Local NGOs that have been identified are also invited to participate. Government agencies are invited. And then there's a fair amount of documentation review that also is involved, as well as observations of the site's operations. You saw the graphic that Amy put up earlier that showed you all of the chapters. You'll see those chapters again reflected in the audit report. This is a snapshot from the actual Albemarle report, and you'll see that we break them down by principles, and we give you what the score was by principle and then what the score is by each individual chapter. So this is a great place to go to look in the report if you want to understand how did this site perform, and if there are areas here which are of particular interest to you, you can then go to the appendix in the report, which is Annex A, and you can scroll through and you can read the rating and the rationale for every single requirement for every chapter based on what the auditors found when they conducted their audit. The outcome of the audit and the report is to assign an achievement level based on scoring levels that IRMA has assigned. Albemarle achieved an IRMA 50, And what that means is that there are a core set of critical requirements that IRMA has established. And these 40 critical requirements have to either be substantially or fully met. And what that means is they fully met the requirement or they've come close, but there may be a few minor gaps. That is a mandatory requirement in order to achieve at least an IRMA 50. In addition to that, it means that within each of those 4 principles, the average scores of those chapters is at least 50%. And Adan, I think I'm going to hand this over to you now.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for this excellent information regarding the report. This is an excellent moment to ask questions to the company as to how we can make use of these results. And with the questions that we hope you will send to us, that we will be able to build constructive dialogue between communities, NGOs, workers, and the company. We would like to expand our dialogue between Indigenous rights holders, local communities, workers, and the company. And this is an excellent moment to lure interest and to enhance the performance of the company. And we have investors, government, and buyers can also make use of this report to better understand the performance of a mine and what the whole process of audit looks like, and to understand the reports and make use in governments this standard as a template to complement and the enhancement of operations. And now I'd like to give the floor to Amy.
Thanks so much for that, Adan. And so I'm going to close this section with how and where you can ask questions of IRMA today, but in weeks and months to come, and also how to file a complaint if there's any aspect of the report and the future reports coming out that you either want to know more about or where you have a concern. I want to remind everyone that if you have questions, you can submit your questions through the Q&A function here in English or in Spanish, and we'll be answering questions at the end and starting in just a few moments. So please feel free to add your questions in there at any time. But in the weeks to come, if you have questions about any aspect of the operation, how is this company doing this? What are they doing specifically to protect water? How are they protecting worker health and safety? How are they engaging with Indigenous rights holders in the region? Those questions that are specific to the company's performance, we encourage you to take directly to the company. It is a fundamental tenet in IRMA that dialogue between mining companies and their workers, the community around Indigenous rights holders increase and are direct between. So IRMA is not a middle broker or a middle person in any way in this space. You are welcomed and encouraged to speak directly to the company and ask them to explain their operations. They're the ones who are best set to explain their own work. In addition, if you have questions specifically about how did the auditors do their work and what evidence were they reviewing and how did they do that, that's best to go to the audit firm, IRM-CBS, and you see emails here, emails for the company, for Albemarle, to ask about their performance, and emails for the audit firm, IRM-CBS, to ask them about the work they did. If you have questions about IRMA's standard, what are the metrics? If you're concerned about whether the metrics accurately capture what are best practices, or you think those metrics should improve, or you want to know why they are what they are, we welcome your questions about the IRMA standard and IRMA's rules for auditing. And so there's an email address here, and you can contact IRMA. In addition to that, though, if you have difficulty getting answers to any question here, you are welcome to contact IRMA, and we can help you figure out who can answer your question. So we encourage and welcome your questions and concerns and your efforts to learn more about the Albemarle operation or about the IRMA system in this report. If your question isn't just a question, but is a complaint, if you're concerned with the information you find there, and if you don't feel that it reflects you well, you will find on IRMA's website at this link a way to provide a complaint through the IRMA system. And if any of you or your colleagues are not able to easily access a web-based form, you may also send by email. You can also do by voice or text through WhatsApp, and you'll also see a QR code on the IRMA website and in the report, where you can scan in and provide in Spanish or English questions that you have and complaints, and we'll make sure they are handled. So moving now to questions that are here. I can see a few, but Alan, do you also have some that you'd like me to answer first that are in queue?
We have a question. Hello, I would like to know how the audit results are disseminated and shared with impacted communities and workers, as well as with local government.
That's a great question. And the first thing I'll say is, honestly, we're still exploring how to do that. This is only the third audit report out in the world. And so how we do it, we'll tell you what we're doing now, but we'll also tell you that we are very much looking to a diverse world of people who care about these issues for your help with it. So we are doing things like this webinar, like making the audit report public on IRMA's website. There, that is the only global standard that makes detailed audit reports like this for mining right now, public like this. But then we are also actively reaching out to mining companies who are in the process, to affected communities, to indigenous leaders, including those who have signatory agreements with Albemarle, to make sure they know that this report is available. In addition to the audit report itself, if you go onto the IRMA website, you will see a much shorter executive summary for those who want a shorter version. You'll see these in English and in Spanish. You'll also see a set of frequently asked questions there that we know people are already asking us. It's our effort to help make sure that the more than 100 pages of this report have a number of simpler ways to understand them as well. We are reaching out through labor unions, NGOs that are members in IRMA, as well as on IRMA's board of directors. And Adan Oliveras Castro and Soledad Sede in region are reaching out through their networks. But of course, even as a small organization, and most of our networks still are new to IRMA, we rely on the people who are most affected by this operation to do their own outreach as well. And if we can help with that, we'd very much like to. And Adan, I don't know if you would like to add something more on outreach and reaching out as well.
To be able to improve our process or the results in the way we disseminate the information is of great importance. And we need, well, the recommendations of the different interested parties, which are local, especially in Atacama. We understand that trust amongst all the different parties is important, and we understand that this is also a process that is going to be taken throughout time to create or establish these relationships among the different interested parties. A voluntary initiative kind of springs the alarms for them.
Okay. Thank you, Adan. I can see other questions coming in.
Yes.
Alan, do you want to decide? You're probably watching
Yep.
which have come first. Thank you.
What is the benefit to the mining company to complete an audit? Is it only for ESG credibility?
Great question. And I think, first of all, I encourage you to ask this question directly to Albemarle or to Anglo-American or to Cardizal, the companies who are doing this, because I think each of them are going to have their own story, and I'm reluctant to speak for them, but I will share with you what I've heard from each of these companies. I mean, first of all, if you wanted just a simple ESG credibility and weren't really interested in making a significant change, IRMA is probably not a good standard for you, because IRMA is asking companies to do more and to be measured more and to share transparently their results more than any other standard system in the world. This is not the place to come for a quick green check. This is a place where companies come to make a commitment to share more transparently their areas of strength, but also the places where they may have challenges in their operation. They are being willing to be measured against more than just legal compliance in whatever country they're operating in. They are being measured against best practices described for a global level. And those best practices are cumulatively stronger than any country's laws. So if a company is coming in being willing to step into that space, they are first of all making a tremendous commitment to transparency and a commitment to allow the engagement of diverse stakeholders and Indigenous rights holders in the process. And we know with this current report that many people may not have yet spoken on how they feel about this operation or industrial extraction in the Atacama more generally, or even industrial extraction globally more generally, because IRMA is still new. Many people may not know, what is this IRMA thing? They may not know, am I safe to participate? Is it going to be credible to participate? And without the full voices of people there, it doesn't hold that full picture. And so we encourage more people to use it and to be in that conversation. But it's certainly a place where this company has been willing to expose their performance more than any other forum is there, and then to make commitments to improvement. Why would a company do that? Because increasingly the world is asking them to do this. So while some will resist, others are saying they can be recognized for that effort to step up and meet that global demand for increased transparency on the impacts and make improvements to in a measurable way. And then also expect that the market of customers and investors will appreciate that if this full supply chain is complicit from us all the way down to end users, through those brands who sell us things, can we all lean in and create a market that demands and expects environmental and social responsibility all the way back up to the raw material level?
Amy, our next question is actually two questions. We've actually have several questions about water. One of the biggest issues around lithium mining in Chile is the question of whether they are depleting groundwater. There's considerable scientific uncertainty on the topic. How did the auditors analyze the impacts of water, and how do the audits address that question?
This is a great question. The Atacama is one of the driest places on Earth. There is an active and controversial conversation between industry and government and civil society stakeholders looking at the connections in groundwater, looking at the connections between lithium brine and surface waters, whether that be drinking water or waters that are just make an ecosystem run. So the audit does look at the issue of water and impacts to water there. And we are very interested. Lithium brine extraction is a far newer technology than the industrial scale mining that the IRMA standard was initially written for. Someone raised, I think, in questions as well about the IRMA standard is going through this year. It's updating. The IRMA standard was passed in 2018, and this year it is opening for public review. And one of the key questions we have is the water chapter sufficiently complete to address new technologies like lithium brine extraction? We think that probably it does need a few more questions in that section. And we took it out to the ground here and at 2 other lithium operations. And we think that it does at least begin to get to these issues and ask a whole set of questions about protecting water in this context that we think are still useful there. But we are very interested, if anything, that more questions need to be asked about the lithium brine extraction. So I think you will find incredibly helpful information to you there about how water is being protected. I encourage you to ask the company more, but also if you read this and think that more questions still need to be asked, we'd love to hear that from you. Michelle, I don't know if you'd like to say more to that question as well, or if you feel like that's complete.
No, I think you've captured it. Only to say too that the auditors will recognize when they hear different points of view. It's not their job to choose one, but to reflect what they hear from various different parties.
Our next question is, can we give more information about the scores? It seems that the complaints chapter obtained 50 points, 50, the lowest compared to the others. Does this mean that the company has greater challenges than improvement?
Good question. As Michelle said, an amazing thing for anyone who's just now opening the IRMA audit report for Albemarle is that you have far more than just the score. As Michelle said, so if you look at a chapter and you see one chapter has 90% and another one has 50%, you can go to that chapter and you will see every single requirement in there. And then you will see, did auditors rank the achievement for that requirement as fully meeting or substantially meeting or partially meeting or not meeting? This is because we know that many companies are on a journey. And so they may have started work and still have more to do, and we want mining companies to get credit for at least starting the work, and then but more credit for then putting it into implementation and into action. So if you go to that chapter around complaints and grievance mechanisms, you'll actually see what they're doing, because then the auditors have written notes on where the company may not be fully getting there and where the work is still to do. And I don't know if Michelle, you want to say a bit more on that one and on that chapter in particular.
I mean, not particularly, I guess, on that chapter, but I mean, as you indicated, that a 50% score is equivalent to partially meets, kind of on an average across the board. And what that means is that this best practice standard that we've set, the site has partially met it. And as a reminder, I mean, Amy mentioned at the beginning that the IRMA standard doesn't match any particular country's regulations. It is a standard that was built from best practices drawn from different countries' regulations, from voluntary standards that are out there. And so it is unlikely that any mine before entering the IRMA process has thought to achieve the levels of conformity that we ask for in order to achieve an IRMA 100. And we really are inviting all mines to participate in the IRMA process, recognizing that they're all in different places in their journey. And so an IRMA 50 really means that they're halfway to getting to full conformity.
In this case, when it comes to grievance mechanisms and stakeholder engagement and complaints, one thing IRMA makes clear as best practice in this space is that anyone should know that they can participate and that they can share complaints and concerns and communicate with the companies. Many companies have started with a list of who they think are most affected, including, of course, their workers, but maybe communities that have signatory agreements with. But the idea is that there should really be an open channel for any stakeholder to participate as well. And so that's new for many companies coming in here. So as you open that chapter and take a greater look, you'll be able to see where it is Albemarle or lower than what IRMA sets as a best practice. But some of those best practices are new to many companies.
Our next question. Thank you very much for the presentation. My question is about external advisors and consultants. do you see the potential for a beneficial role for consultants to help mines through the initial self-assessment?
Great question. And I actually see it helpful to both companies, but also civil society as well. So I'm going to say something on both of them. There is a cadre of consultants in the world who have tremendous expertise in the mining space on social issues as well as environmental issues. We encourage you to become fluent in the IRMA standard and best practices. We would very much like that to be a two-way street. We'd love to hear your insights on how the IRMA standard can improve further this year based on what you know of mining, but also for you to learn the IRMA system and share that back. There are a number of mining companies who are looking for help to prepare themselves for independent third-party review. You saw Michelle share a slide earlier where there are nearly 70 mining companies already engaged with close to 90 sites preparing for independent audit. Many of them are looking for technical support. And particularly because they're using the self-assessment tool first, they may be identifying places where they have chapters where their scores are low. And so before moving to audit, they're saying, can we improve? And foundational in IRMA's theory of change is that we're not just out there scoring companies, but we're creating value for them to improve. So we want them to reach out to those of you who are experts in the field and build in that improvement right now in the moment, not only commitments in coming years, but to commit to improve in the moment. So absolutely, there's a role for those of you doing that work. But on the civil society side, there are several mining companies already who are providing funds to civil society stakeholders and Indigenous rights holders in their region for those community-based groups to watchdog the mining company itself and to use funds to hire their own technical experts to understand water monitoring data, for example, or to read a new expansion plan or a new plans for how to manage waste. And so we highly recommend technical experts who are also available to help community-based groups as they engage with their company and understand how to advocate for themselves and protect their well-being as well.
Amy, we have a request that you slow down a little bit.
I will. Apologies to the translators.
Our next question is about in which stage of development can a mine look for IRMA certification? Can early stage projects apply? And perhaps you could address the issue of certification in answering this question.
So Michelle, would you like to take the stage and then I'll take certification?
I would be happy to. Earlier is better when it comes to working within the IRMA standard, although it is appropriate to be used at any stage of the mining life cycle. But IRMA, in addition to being a standard and a means of measuring performance, it is also an incredible roadmap for what does responsible mining look like. And there are many aspects of mining that, when done well and done in the planning stages, really lays the groundwork for a very successful and long-term responsible mine to be in place. So sites that are in the development phase can look at the standard and find those things. For instance, if resettlement is required, or free, prior, and informed consent for Indigenous communities that are around you, establishing good stakeholder engagement processes early on. From an environmental perspective, collecting the right baseline data in order to be able to demonstrate that your mitigation measures have been effective at preventing harm. There's a myriad of things to be done early on. So sites that are in the development phase will have great success in engaging early in the IRMA process. We do have a draft standard right now that is targeted for projects that are in that development, permitting, construction phase. As we release our new revised standard, we have integrated those requirements into a single standard. And so what will come out eventually will be one integrated standard that brings that in. But for right now, you can go to our website and find a draft version of the standard that is targeted to the early phases of mining projects.
And as Michelle said, on the other side of it as well, there's also a draft standard for mineral processing. So for the standalone smelter, refiner, other processing one. So in terms of when can you come in, you can be at the exploration development, you can have an active mine, or you could have standalone processing facility and still engage and use the IRMA standard and demonstrate your performance, and also make commitments to improve against it over time using any of those timelines in the standard coming out. Alan asked me to also address the part of the question that's about certification. That is a phrase that we're not using in IRMA any longer, in part because the IRMA standard is not pass or fail. It's scoring, and it's scoring on a track which is stronger than legal compliance in given places. We are asking mines to be willing to be measured against things which they may not be required by law to do in their region, but which have been defined as a shared definition for more responsible mining practices and best practices there globally. So you will see us scoring, but where something becomes certified responsible, of course, is an active and diverse conversation. What might be enough for one company who's purchasing may not feel like good enough to a community who lives closest and deals with issues of concern with their drinking water quality or dry wells for livestock or blowing dust. So it's why we really are driving toward this continuing improvement model and scores, so that people can really, rather than just giving a green check and saying something passes or not, it's providing information. And increasingly, this is what's legally required as well in the OECD due diligence to understand supply chains. No single voluntary initiative can act as a proxy and say that was good enough because they gave the green check. It's really about transparency and access to information, understanding your supply chains. And we really hope the level of detail and information is helpful, whether you're a company doing that diligence to understand your supply chain, or you are a community member living a kilometer from the operation.
Our next question is about consequences. Are there any repercussions for a mining company if improvements are not made in a timely manner after the audit report is published? Also, if new issues arise after the initial audit, is there a way to factor that in?
Michelle, you want to take that one?
Yep. Such a great question. So you may remember that I talked about our 40 critical requirements. Any site that achieves IRMA 50 or higher is expected to fully meet all of the critical requirements by the end of their audit cycle. So the initial audit that has been conducted, for instance, at Albemarle, is just the first audit of lifetime of audits that they will do against the IRMA standard, as long as they choose to participate. And so following this audit, there will be a surveillance audit in 12 to 18 months from the publication of the report. And then within 3 years, there will be a re-verification audit in which the auditors will come back and do a fairly thorough review. It is by that audit that they are expected to bring any critical requirements that were only substantially met need to be brought up to the level of fully met. If they don't do that, then they risk their achievement level being suspended, and then they would be asked to correct those issues before they can be reinstated and allowed to make claims against the IRMA standard. Alan, there was a second part of that question. Can you remind me?
If new issues arise after the
Right.
initial audit, is there a way to factor that in?
Right. Yes. So, so new issues, which can be a lot of different things. It could be changes in an operation. Perhaps there's been expansions. Perhaps there's been a sale to a new owner. New issues might also be new issues of concern among community members or employees or NGOs. Members of civil society may have some additional concerns. Those are all expected items that the auditors will investigate during each audit that they conduct in order to understand what has changed. And so that process of auditing on a pretty regular basis is intended to capture both performance changes at the site, but also changes in the operations, changes in community perception, changes in science, whatever they might be.
You. Our next question is, how do countries and state governance connect with or orient to the IRMA process? For example, as with Chile's role or connection with the Atacama audit.
Thank you, Alan. I'm going to answer your question. Well, with certain humility, we wish to thank the fact that we've been mentioned as one of the 2 voluntary initiatives within the national strategy for lithium of the government of Chile. We've been working with the Ministry of Mines to learn more as to how IRMA can be applied to supplement any lithium strategy, and especially as a tool to strike up dialogue and participation amongst all the different stakeholders. So we're talking to other governments in Latin America and in North America as well, and the Caribbean and other places around the world to accrue this knowledge with co-governments. How does the process actually work? And how can this be used not to substitute any law, as Amy has stated, but rather to supplement and to be used as a tool more than anything else?
Thank you. Our next question is, how do you see your audit fitting in with other standards like GRI, SASB, etc.?
Michelle, do you want to take that first? As an auditor who's measured against multiple different global standards over 30 years, I defer to you first.
Well, I think in particular, these examples that have been given are frameworks that we have considered in the development of the IRMA standard, as well as the IRMA assurance process. It is not uncommon for sites to be holding themselves accountable to a variety of standards, using those standards to report in their annual sustainability reports, for instance, reporting out to investors, reporting, to their communities about their performance. And I guess my comment really is that I think I would hope that most people would find that they're compatible. So if there are efforts to or intent on mining companies' parts to report against these various standards, that they overlap is recognized, and there's some efficiencies gained.
Thank you, Michelle. Our next question is, looking at one of your earlier reports, I was struck by not Albemarle's audit. I was struck by a 30% rating for cyanide management, and that raises a question: do IRMA auditors take up serious non-compliance with other authorities, by which I assume the questioner means government authorities?
So it's a good question, and then a reminder that IRMA is not replacing regulatory schemes. So we're not there demonstrating that a site is or is not in compliance with regulations. We really are holding sites through our independent audit process accountable to a set of performance standards within the IRMA standard, and many of those are system related, and then they also may have other components to them where they, we ask them to engage with communities. And I can't comment specifically on the Carazol performance because I don't remember the details of that, but much like we commented on the question previously about the complaint mechanism and what does it mean when a site has scored 50%. When a site has scored 30%, what it means is that within the IRMA standard, they may not have fully developed and executed management systems that IRMA has asked in order to be able to demonstrate responsible mining. I think just to follow up too on that idea of like whether we would reach out to regulatory authorities, that's generally not an expectation of the IRMA auditors. There are probably rare instances where, and it would probably be, you know, something immediately dangerous to life and health, where I think an audit firm, probably independent really even of the IRMA process, an audit firm may feel compelled to act in a certain way in order to, you know, ensure that life and health is protected.
And to add to Michelle's point on that, I mean, the very first chapter in the IRMA standard is legal compliance, and it is that for a reason, right? It's saying that in the least you should be in compliance with the laws in your jurisdiction. But that IRMA goes on for more than 20 chapters more, because in many jurisdictions, laws vary tremendously, either in how they're written or whether or not they're enforced and regulated. There are countries where mining is happening which are not requiring a set of water quality standards, or the standards are quite weak or they're not enforced. And that's part of IRMA's role, is to layer in. That way, if a community in Nevada wants to ask probing questions about a proposal there, they're not feeling that they're just pushing that pressure off to Argentina or Chile or Indonesia and other places, that wherever mining is happening, communities can ask these questions and can expect best practices of the industry. And further to Michelle's point on standards, a number of standards may involve only self-reporting. Or GRI, for example, only recently began a mining specific standard. We are looking specifically at how do we build this in so we're not being overly redundant. And so companies, what you're doing already, mining companies can get credit for the work they do. It's why OECD due diligence and the importance work there is built into the IRMA standard, or UN guiding principles on human rights, or ILO 169, or the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. You will see these things built into the IRMA standard and referenced across, but then IRMA is going beyond to fill in the specifics of what's needed. And I'm reminded by one colleague, if you go to the IRMA website, you will see the added guidance on chapter 4.1 and lithium brine extraction in particular. It's added guidance for auditors, for mining companies, and for communities on when auditors are looking at lithium brine extraction, what specifically additional should they look at that makes the IRMA chapter on water relevant in that space. Alan, I know we're running very close to time, and yes.
Yep. I've got two closing questions, and then those that we did not answer verbally, we will answer via email. So the first one is, are there lessons learned from this audit about how the process can be made more efficient so that it becomes more scalable?
So many lessons learned. So we all have been saying with humility, mining companies are new to this, our auditors are new to this, IRMA is new to this, and workers, communities, indigenous rights holders are new to seeing how do they feel about participating. So we're all in a learning mode. We know that if we can get to communities and rights holders earlier, before as an audit is starting, they will better understand how to participate and why. And then sharing the value, so more mining companies feel that they receive the value of the effort to come in. In terms of scalability, there's been a lot of talk about the length of time between when an audit starts and a report comes out. In large part, that is because IRMA allows mining companies multiple times to stop the process and to make improvements. That fits our theory of change, that we want to drive value for improvements to be made, not just to go out and do scoring. But it can mean that a process takes longer. That's not because IRMA is sitting slowly doing the work. It's because a mining company may have paused at their stage one to make improvements before having auditors come out. Or as Michelle said, including in the Albemarle case, after getting their first report, they chose to make more improvements and then bring auditors back to verify the improvements have been made and then share the ultimate work out into the world. So we could certainly make it faster. but and many would like to see it so, and I'm sure that there's going to be a cross-stakeholder discussion in IRMA about, can you make the process faster? But I will tell you right now, even if it's slower, it is working to the intended purpose, which is to drive value and opportunity for mining companies to improve.
Thank you, Amy. And our last question, we've had several people ask this question. Regarding the revised, updated IRMA standard, can you please give us a quick update on progress and timeline, and if possible, what the main changes might be?
So our hope is that you, the world, will have the revised draft standard out in September or October, with a couple of months to review. And if you need more time, you simply ask for extension. We know that there are a whole set of chapters already that will be significantly changed. And there have been cross-stakeholder working groups already feeding into IRMA ideas on how they can change, including the greenhouse gas emissions chapter, including chapters that deal with gender, including chapters that deal with waste and keeping up with issues around the risks of waste and tailings, and the work of the GISTM on the industry side to address mine waste, including Indigenous rights. All of these issues have progressed significantly in the 5 years since the IRMA standard came out in 2018. In many cases, what you're going to see is guiding questions throughout that document. It asks you all, what would you think? Here's the challenge we face when we look at resettlement in a community. How do we resolve this? So you're not going to just see a finished document that says, do you like it, yes or no, but asks you to lean in and help us with what are really difficult issues in the supply chains of materials that industrialized society are using every day.
So that is our last question. If you could, yeah, that's our last question.
Well, we welcome continued questions in English and in Spanish, and are happy to talk to anyone one-on-one or in a group. And so thank you so much for your interest today. And we look forward to continuing the conversation as a whole set of other audit reports come out in Chile and Brazil, South Africa, and otherwise. In the places where audits are new and starting, Mozambique and Senegal, we encourage you to please participate and engage. And thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.